Delirium. Even the sound of it feels like stepping into a foggy glade, where the air shivers with possibility. It's not a place you plan to visit, but one you stumble into, often without realizing it. The word itself carries a weight both unsettling and tantalizing. A murmur of feverish dreams, a suggestion that the world is not as it seems. At first glance, it speaks of disorder, of a mind untethered and wandering. Yet, like the shimmering edge of a mirage, Delirium offers something more, a glimpse into the unknown, where beauty and madness dance as one. Today, we step into that haze, following the thread of Magic the Gathering's Delirium mechanic. First introduced in Shadows over Innistrad, Delirium invites us to trade certainty for creativity, asking us to find elegance to the graveyard's chaos. 4 card types: creatures, sorceries, artifacts, you name it, you must find a way to get them in there. Simple enough, until you see the tapestry it weaves, a balancing act of strategy and intuition, a puzzle built not from order, but from fragments. Yet, to call Delirium just a mechanic feels too narrow. It's not merely a question of card advantage or trigger timing, it's a story, a lens through which we view Magic's world. Delirium asks us to consider what it means to transform, to let decay give rise to power, and to accept that every beginning comes wrapped in an ending. It challenges us to look at the graveyard not as a final resting place, but as a space for potential, where echoes of the past gather strength to reshape the present. Together, we'll wander through this space, letting our curiosity guide us. We'll meet cards like Convert to Slime, where destruction becomes a fertile ground for growth, the broken pieces reformed into an ooze that feels more alive than the relics it devoured, and we'll see how the storytelling of Innistrad intertwines with the mechanic, pulling us deeper into a world where shadows take shape, where paranoia blossoms into power, and where even the most steadfast, like the paranoid Parish Blade, find their convictions twisted into something unrecognizable. And then, there are the figures who loom large in this tale. Valgavoth, the lurking predator of Duskmourn, feeding on fractured minds and stolen realities. Emrakul, the titan who makes dreams real and madness inevitable, a being whose very presence reshapes the meaning of existence. Through their stories, we'll uncover not just how Delirium works, but why it matters, to the game and to the stories it tells, and perhaps even to us. So here we stand at the edge of Delirium's shadow, not to conquer its mysteries, but to embrace them. What secrets lie waiting in the graveyard? What truths can we uncover in chaos? And as we lose ourselves in this world of blurred boundaries, what might we find waiting on the other side? Let's begin. I hope your coffee is warm, and let's look not at the answers, but with the quiet thrill of not knowing. Delirium first took root in a world teetering on the brink of madness, Innistrad, a plane where the line between reason and chaos is as fragile as a moth's wing. Here, shadows twist and elongate, faith trembles under the weight of doubt, and the graveyard is no mere resting place. It is a cauldron of transformation. The mechanic of Delirium wasn't simply a flourish of gameplay innovation, it became a thread binding the plane's fractured lives together. Angels, demons, humans, wolves, no one escaped the pool of this creeping fevered madness. On Innistrad, the past never truly lies still. It stirs beneath the surface, restless, bleeding its influence into the present. The graveyard becomes a stage where forgotten acts are replayed by zombies and spirits, where discarded tools and spent lives rise again, their stories unfinished. For example, the humble yet haunting Inquisitor's Ox. At a glance, it appears unassuming. A 2/5 creature for 4 mana, a workhorse more than a showstopper, but with Delirium achieved, the ox transforms. Its vigilance awakens and its power grows, and it becomes something more than livestock. No longer grazing, it trudges with grim purpose, hauling guillotines to silent squares. The flavor text lays bare its chilling story. The fields of Gavany stand abandoned, the plows left to rust, while the oxen haul death on wheels. These beasts, long yoked to humanity's toil, now serve as instruments of desperation, carrying justice, or perhaps vengeance, to those accused of witchcraft and monstrosity. The ox is no longer just a creature of the field, it becomes a living symbol of the way Delirium touches all things, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary, and the benign into the macabre. And then consider the extricator of sin. If the ox carries the guillotine, the extricator sharpens its blade. This human cleric embodies the tension of Innistrád's madness, a figure of faith turning to sacrificial rites in a desperate attempt to banish the eldritch corruption seeping into the land. The extricator takes what is broken, discarded creatures, fragments of hope, and sacrifices them to summon angelic echoes from the grave. These spectral beings, clad in the righteousness of the past, rise to combat the creeping influence of the Eldrazi. But he doesn't know that what he is summoning is actually an Eldrazi that might soon become him. Here, Delirium becomes more than just a manifestation of madness. It's a grim resolve, a willingness to embrace the grotesque, to salvage what remains of humanity, only to give it away. In both the Ox and the Extricator, we see how Delirium isn't just a state of mind or a gameplay feature, it's a force of transformation. A reflection of Innistrád's deep, unrelenting tension. It is the choice to gaze into the abyss and reach out, not to pull yourself back, but to drag something from the darkness into the light. And in doing so, it asks a question: how much of ourselves are we willing to sacrifice to survive the madness? From the shadow-laden forests of Innistrad, where madness clung to the air like mist, Delirium stretched its grasp, finding new forms in the shifting worlds beyond. It was in Modern Horizons that this haunting mechanic adopted the hues of blue and red. Colors of creativity and chaos, of unbridled thought and fiery recklessness. Here Delirium took a tone both mystical and volatile, embodied by the giants who towered over the land. Figures steeped in ancient prophecy and raw, untamed foresight. These titanic beings were more than their immense stature. They carried the weight of inevitability itself. Their every step rippled with power, and their gaze saw not just what was, but what could be. In their hands, Delirium shifted from madness to destiny, a force that found and bound the chaos of the present to the fragile threats of the future. It was a different kind of awe, one that left you questioning whether the giants brought wisdom or ruin, or perhaps inevitably both. The story darkened further when Delirium crept into the shadowy halls of Duskmourn. Here, the mechanic twisted into something more sinister, no longer a reflection of decay's natural course, but a weapon wielded with deliberate cruelty. The rules of life and death bent to the will of Thalgathoth, a figure both grotesque and magnetic and hard to say the name of, whose hunger thrived on the fragile edges of the mind. In Duskmourn, fear wasn't a consequence of Delirium, it was its foundation. The graveyard became a banquet, where every discarded relic, every crumpled memory of a fallen creature, and every extinguished spell fed the insatiable. For Thalgathoth, fear steeped in Delirium was an art form, its flavor delicate and layered. Madness here was not an accident of fate, it was cultivated, nurtured, and savored. Across these planes, Delirium is a thread weaving disparate worlds into a shared tapestry of transformation and terror. On Innistrad, it binds its victims in a communal descent into chaos. In the sprawling vistas of modern horizons, it embodies power and prophecy, a tempest of potential waiting to be unleashed. And in the suffocating darkness of Duskmorn, it becomes a weapon of subjugation, turning despair into a predator's feast. Yet, through all these iterations, one truth endures. Delirium is a mirror. It reflects not just the world around it, but the one within. The fears we harbor, the destinies we chase, and the fragile line we walk between clarity and collapse. When the veil of reason lifts, when the world tilts and delirium takes hold, what will you see? Perhaps more importantly, who will you become? Isn't a mirror just an example? Let's look at one. Winter is the embodiment of delirium, a figure whose very existence reflects the chaotic, layered nature of Duskmorn itself. His story winds through the shadowed corridors of the house, a place where fear and madness warp the boundaries of reality. A decade of survival within these cursed walls has left Winter hardened, cynical, and fiercely resourceful. He has learned to value life only insofar as it can be preserved, even if that means sacrificing others to ensure his own survival. His bond with delirium is not merely mechanical, it's a reflection of his fragmented soul. Each choice he's made threading into a hole that teeters on the edge of desperation and cruelty. Winter's role as a misanthropic guide is etched into his very nature. He offers knowledge, but at a cost. Each player is granted the chance to draw 2 cards during their upkeep. An interesting glimpse of understanding in a place where mystery is a weapon. Yet when delirium takes hold, Winter's darker side emerges. The rules of the game twist under his influence, reducing his opponents' minds and maximum hand size in proportion to the diversity of their graveyard. This subtle, insidious effect mirrors Winter's manipulative nature. He shares what he knows but ensures that no one ever truly gains the upper hand. His guidance is a sharp, transactional blade that carves through alliances and leaves others scrambling for balance. The more fractured your graveyard and your mind, a mosaic of spells, artifacts, creatures, enchantments, whatever else, the more vulnerable you are to his cunning. In the story, Winter's knowledge of Duskmorn's deadly traps is just as double-edged. He warns newcomers about the lurking razorkin and the treachery of cultists, but his advice is far from selfless. Each word he offers is a calculated move, laying the groundwork for future exploitation. His guidance, like delirium itself, is never free from consequence. If the misanthropic guide, gross, explores Winter's control and cunning, the cynical opportunist delves into his hunger for power. Here, Winter wields his abilities with ruthless efficiency, embodying the chaos of the graveyard in both story and mechanics. With Death Touch, he becomes a predator of precision, ensuring every attack strikes with finality. Each attack mills 3 cards, feeding the graveyard, a mechanic that reflects Winter's destructive, deliberate survival tactics. Through Delirium, his opportunism is fully revealed. He can exile cards from his graveyard to reclaim something tangible, pulling a permanent back into existence. Yet this act is not without its cost. The finality counters placed on these resurrected remnants serve as haunting reminders of Duskmorn's unrelenting grip. You get one more chance. This hunger for power finds its echo in Winter's story. In his most damning act, he sacrifices his closest companion to the demon Valgothoth, bargaining away friendship and trust for a fleeting promise of freedom. The betrayal cements his bond to the demon, solidifying his role as a figure who thrives in the decay of what once was. It is a chilling reflection of Delirium's essence, a mechanic and a soul that prospers in loss. Winter's patched together appearance and pragmatic demeanor are more than just affectations. They are the visible signs of a man held together by fragments. In many ways, he is the living embodiment of delirium, a mechanic fueled by decay and diversity, thriving in the spaces where order crumbles into chaos. On Innistrad, Delirium wove a shared madness that touched angels, demons, and mortals. In Duskmourn, Winter makes his madness personal. His survival hinges on the remnants of the past, both his own and those of others, as he bends the boundaries between life and death to his will. Through Winter's duality, his roles as both guide and opportunist, we see the full arc of Delirium's power. It promises knowledge, but exacts a price. It offers strength, but demands sacrifice. And in Winter's hands it becomes both a weapon and a mirror, again, reflecting the desperate choices made in a world where nothing is certain. His story is not simply about survival, but about the cost of survival in a place where the past never truly rests. Winter is a keeper of lost things, memories, lives, and truths. As you follow him deeper into Duskmourn, the question remains: what will you uncover in the shadows, and what will it cost you to claim it? Art has always danced on the edge of beauty and madness, a fragile balance where creation is both gift and a curse. History tells of artists who were so consumed by their work that they became it, their lives blurring into their creations. Van Gogh, who saw stars as tempestuous swirls of emotion, painted not just with color, but with the weight of his sorrow, pouring his soul onto every canvas. Obsession, that fairy muse, fuels brilliance, but it leaves its own kind of scars. This eternal story of devotion and ruin echoes in the lives of magic's most delirious figures. Take the death-cap cultivator, a recluse who tends to his glowing mushrooms deep within the damp shadows of his cave. To him, these fungi are more than plants. They are companions, children, and perhaps reflections of his own hidden soul. His gnarled hands, worn by years of care, brush the delicate caps with reverence. Soft murmurs escape his lips, secrets shared only with the luminous groves that surround him. At first, the villagers sought his knowledge, lured by his uncanny understanding of the natural world. But their awe curdled into unease. "What do you feed them?" they asked. His smile, wide and unsettling, offered no answers. As time passed, his devotion deepened, and so did his transformation. His pale, damp skin began to sprout spores, and the line between caretaker and creation faded entirely. In his solitude, he became a part of the world he nurtured, a figure of both beauty and decay. Like Van Gogh's stars, no one else could see this world as he did, where madness and artistry intertwined. And then the manic scribe, lost to the relentless rhythm of their quill. Their desk is a battlefield strewn with crumpled parchment and shattered quills, casualties of a war waged against the fleeting nature of thought. Ink stains creep up their arms like vines, mingling with scars earned in moments of frantic creation where even the quills had to pierce their hands. To the villagers, the scribe is mad, but they no longer hear the whispers of those who do not understand. Their world is a blur of ink and parchment, each word a desperate attempt to preserve something of the fleeting present. The quill never rests, ticking like a clock counting down the moments until their unraveling. Creation is their underworld, and like Orpheus, they descend willingly, chasing a vision they can never grasp. And there's Obsessive Skinner. Their work begins with practicality, crafting hides and leather with precision and care. Villagers revere their skill, marveling at the fine pelts they prepare, but over time the hunts grow strange. Rats, ravens, and creatures no one would think to pursue. Practice, the Skinner murmurs, eyes darting, hands trembling over their tools. Practice becomes fixation, and the line between art and horror, and practice and fixation and flesh becomes canvas. Sinew turns to thread, and obsession consumes every waking moment. The Skinner's creations are both grotesque and entrancing, a terrible beauty that defies reason. Like Pygmalion, they shape their idealized vision, but this is no lifeless marble. It is raw and visceral, pulsing with something darker than life. These figures, whether captured in myth, painted on cardboard, or inspired by real-world artists, remind us of obsession's double-edged nature. It can inspire brilliance or consume, leaving ruin. Magic's Delirium embodies this tension. Immense power, but at an undeniable cost. The balance is as delicate as a mushroom's cap, as sharp as a quill's point. And isn't that true of us too? You and I sitting here together, drawn into a world where planeswalkers clash, oozes writhe, and titans reshape reality. Our connection to magic is its own kind of delirium. It's more than a game, it's a space where imagination and reality blend until the line between them grows very, very thin. Think of the hours spent crafting decks, debating strategies with friends, or cracking open a fresh pack of cards. The stories we tell of our victories and defeats echo in our minds, alive in a way that transcends the tabletop. The game doesn't just bleed into our lives, it becomes part of our lives, reshaping the way we see the world and ourselves, or at least that's the way for me. And maybe that's the point. Obsession, after all, reminds us that life is more than what is practical or mundane. It invites us to dream and to reach beyond the boundaries of reality, even if we risk losing ourselves along the way. Whether drawn to the art, the mechanics, or the stories, we are part of something larger, a shared vision, a collective dream. So let us embrace it, let it inspire us, fuel our own creations, and remind us that the line between imagination and reality is not a wall, but an open door. After all, isn't that what obsession is for? Delirium is an untethered state, a fissure in reality where the edges blur, and the center cannot hold. For some, it is the place where sanity dissolves, the threads of the mind unraveling into a chaotic abyss. For others, it is the wellspring of power, where boundaries are not broken, but remade. Imagine the mind wreck demon, its wings slicing through the oppressive mist of Innistrad, each beat carrying a whisper of the lives it has devoured. Shadows flicker around its form, memories of the chaos it leaves in its wake. Mechanically, the demon embodies its hunger for madness, milling cards with ruthless efficiency, clawing at the edges of its summoner's mind until the graveyard brims with delirium. Even then, it remains an ominous presence, a storm cloud on the battlefield, ready to unleash its fury at the slightest provocation. Or the patchwork beastie, lumbering through the darkened alleys of Duskmourn, its form a pitiful assembly of scraps, rags, and broken bits. Seems almost tragic at first glance, but there's something unsettling in the crooked mask it wears, its blank visage posing an unspoken question about its own existence. The flavor says it. It doesn't know it isn't real. Only under delirium's influence does it stir to life, a fragmented echo of the mind that created it, a mind unraveling into its own chaotic masterpiece. But delirium is not all sorrow. The chaos weaves opportunity, its decay nurturing unexpected growth. In Innistrad's abandoned graveyards where the living dare not tread, Ishkana Graf-Widow waits. Her art freezes a single haunting moment, her massive legs anchored to crumbling gravestones, her brood weaving silken threads that stretch like lines of fate across the cemetery. Ishkana doesn't seek the living, they avoid the graveyards out of fear. But she claims their silence, spinning it into her domain. Her ability summons spiderlings from the graveyard itself when it is silent enough. Creatures of decay and loyalty bound to her in life and beyond. And these beings reveal that Delirium is more than chaos. It is a lens refracting reality into something both grotesque and profound. In the cracks where order falters, creation thrives. In madness, power is born. Delirium invites us to reimagine the world, not as it is, but as it might become when order dissolves. No creature embodied this alchemy better than oozes, beings for whom destruction is not an end but a prelude to creation. Picture this: a battlefield littered with fragments, a shattered artifact, its gleaming surface tarnished by age and conflict. The remnants of a forgotten enchantment swirl like ghostly smoke, and there the broken form of a creature, its legacy fading into the earth. To most these are relics of defeat, but to an ooze they are sustenance. Convert to slime captures this transformation. Mechanically it dismantles your opponent's strategy piece by piece, breaking apart their artifacts, creatures and enchantments. But it doesn't stop at destruction. If Delirium is achieved, these fragments coalesce into a single ravenous ooze. Its power and toughness reflect the mana value of what was consumed, a literal embodiment of its hunger for the past, and nothing is wasted. The flavor is perfect. An ooze doesn't fear what is broken, it becomes it. On Innistrad, the inexorable blob lurks in the shadowed wilderness. Its name is more a warning than a title, a declaration of its unstoppable nature. It lacks the fangs of a wolf or the claws of a demon, but instead it creeps forward, an amorphous heap of sludge glistening faintly in the moonlight. Its menace lies not in the speed or rage, but in inevitability. The blob doesn't hunt, it consumes. The blob's mechanics tell its story with chilling precision. When it attacks and Delirium is active, it multiplies. A second ooze emerges and then another, the process repeating as long as there are graveyards to fuel it. This is not the horror of sudden violence, but of inexorable decay. You cannot outrun it because it is patient, it is unyielding. But where Innistrad's oozes are born of neglect and decay, Duskmourn's convert to slime feels deliberate. Its creation is not a passive byproduct of rot, but an act of intention. A legacy shaped by the player's choices. And this is exactly the same difference between Innistrad and Duskmourn. There is something deeply philosophical about the nature of the ooze. Unlike creatures of flesh or spirit, an ooze has no identity, no memory, and no ego. It is pure becoming. It is a creation of process rather than being. Within the framework of Delirium, the ooze transforms into a metaphor. What might we become if we let go of all that binds us? In the breakdown of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, there is the potential to create something unburdened by the past. A token, perhaps. Oozes remind us of the beauty in destruction and the inevitability of renewal. They thrive not despite chaos, but because of it. And Delirium is more than a mechanic. It is a way of seeing the game and the world in a new lens. What is lost is not always gone. Sometimes it is simply waiting to take on a new shape. Delirium teeters on the knife's edge between perception and reality, a space where what we imagine begins to shape the world around us. It's a concept that has fascinated us for centuries, a theme explored not only in mechanics like Magic the Gathering's Delirium, but in the stories we tell about the fragility of the human mind. Take Alice in Wonderland, a tale of tumbling down a rabbit hole into a world that operates on its own skewed logic. Wonderland is not a simple place. It is a reflection of Alice's psyche, where whimsy and menace intertwine. Her encounters with impossible creatures, grinning cats, mad hatters, and hostile queens raise an unnerving question. Are these figments of her imagination, or has the very act of believing in them made them actually real? The same uneasy magic pulses through the paranoid parish blade. On the surface, it's the image of steadfast vigilance. A soldier standing ready with first strike and spear in hand, facing an unseen threat. But look closer, a tentacle snakes from beneath his armor, an intrusion of Emrakul's otherworldly influence. The soldier doesn't see it. His paranoia has turned inward, conjuring enemies from his own fears. The card's flavor text underscores this tragic truth that the mind is perfectly capable of creating its own monsters. Mechanically, the Parish Blade does thrive on Delirium, as the line between what is real and imagined blur. The soldier becomes more formidable, gaining an extra power and the first strike because he will be first to strike, because he is scared. But what does it mean when your greatest strength is also your unraveling? In storytelling terms, this is where Delirium becomes more than a mechanic. It's a narrative device. The graveyard filled with echoes of what once was becomes a mirror for the mind's capacity to distort and becomes an actual fear. And that is a cycle. And then there's Emrakul. The Great Titan is not just a creature, but a force. An existential rupture that dissolves the barriers between reality and nightmare, like the ooze, but something is greater here. Her influence on Innistrad didn't just twist flesh, it warped minds, turning the orderly and mundane into grotesque spectacles of unease. But Emrakul doesn't create madness out of nothing, she amplifies what's already there. The fears, desires, and buried secrets of those she touched manifest as physical horrors. She is the embodiment of the idea that what we believe or fear can reshape the world. Like Alice, the people of Innistrad tumble down their own rabbit holes. For some, like the Parish Blade, the descent is gradual, the whispers growing louder until they can no longer tell where they end and the madness begins. For others, the transformation is immediate and brutal, their bodies becoming reflections of their warped minds. And at the center of it all stands Emrakul, the architect of Delirium, the dreamer whose dreams spill into the waking life. As we move closer to her presence, the question stays. How do we distinguish what is real from what is merely believed? And if we act in belief, is that enough to make something real? What does that mean for the world Emrakul leaves in her wake? In the shadowed corners of Duskmourn, Valgafoth stirs. It is a creature that thrives on the haze of half-truths and fractured realities, its form a writhing mass of contradictions, neither fully there and not entirely absent either. Valgafoth feeds on the delirium of others, weaving their fragmented thoughts into its own essence, growing larger, hungrier, and more real with every fractured mind it consumes. It is a predator of perception, its presence growing sharper and more real the more its victims lose their reality in the labyrinth of their thoughts. Duskmourn's mists blur the line between dream and waking life, creating a perfect hunting ground for beings like Valgafoth. The realm itself seems complicit in its predation, a landscape of half-remembered horrors and lingering doubts. As you wander Duskmourn, it's easy to imagine yourself safe, until you see the edge of a claw in the corner of your eye or hear a sound that can't possibly exist. By the time you realize the truth, it's already too late. Valgafoth has taken root in your mind, and with each passing moment, your delirium becomes its feast. Valgafoth's influence is a dark echo of something older, something far grander and more devastating. Emrakul on Innistrad warped everything she touched and everything she encountered, turning stone into flesh, minds into mazes, and lives into nightmares. Yet Emrakul doesn't simply sow chaos, she creates a new order, one that makes perfect sense to those under her thrall. Her victims don't merely lose their grip on reality, they come to accept her altered version of truth. The parallels between Valgavoth and Emrakul are striking. Both creatures feed on the collapse of certainty, thriving in spaces where logic falters and imagination takes over. But where Valgavoth is a personal predator, targeting individuals and twisting their private fears, Emrakul operates on a cosmic scale. Her arrival on Innistrad didn't just corrupt its inhabitants, it reshaped the plane itself, bending it to her will. Mechanically, both creatures manifest through Delirium, a mechanic that captures their essence perfectly. Valgavoth's card, if it existed, might grant power and resilience as more cards fill your graveyard, reflecting the way it grows stronger as the mind around it revels. Emrakul's legendary presence meanwhile looms large in Emrakul the Promised End. Her cost decreases as Delirium sets in, a chilling reminder that the more fractured your world becomes, the closer she comes to claiming it. And while Valgavoth didn't really get a Delirium card, Valgavoth Terror Eater does work with your opponents putting cards in their graveyard, because then they get exiled and Valgavoth can return your fears into definite manifestation of real versions of whatever you fear, just so that you will feed him again and he can create even more fears. And there's a subtle, more important difference between the two. Valgavoth's hunger is primal, driven by an instinct to consume and grow. Emrakul, on the other hand, seems purposeful in her destruction. Her influence isn't chaotic, it's transformative. To her victims, the change she brings is not madness but revelation. To face Emrakul is to confront the terrifying possibility that the world as you know it is not the only way things could be. That there is an order beyond your understanding, and that you might become a part of it. On Duskmourn, the mists may part for a moment, revealing Valgavoth's shifting form, only for it to vanish again as quickly as it appeared. On Innistrad, Emrakul's tendrils are inescapable, her presence felt even in her absence. Together they remind us that Delirium is not just a loss of control, it's an invitation to something greater and far more dangerous. As we step away from these creatures, we're left with the question. Never there is an answer. Do we fear Delirium because it blurs the line between reality and imagination, or because it reveals that the line was never there to begin with? And so, with Emrakul's shadow still falling across our thoughts, we move toward the end of our journey. So let's take a moment to reflect. I've repeated myself today as a delirious person should. Delirium isn't just a mechanic. It's a story, a feeling and a connection. From the haunting fields of Innistrad to the eerie halls of Duskmourn, Delirium ties together the fragments of what once was, turning loss into power and chaos into opportunity. Whether it's the Inquisitor's ox dragging its grim burden across the fallow fields of Gavany, or winter's cold calculating survival in the heart of a living nightmare. Delirium reminds us that every piece of the graveyard and every piece of the game tells a story about transformation, resilience, and the lengths we will go to find meaning in madness. So as you shuffle your deck and prepare for your next game, do remember that every card you mill, every sacrifice you make is a puzzle piece to your strategy. Delirium thrives on the echoes of the past, and it's up to you to turn those echoes into a symphony of victory. So thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of Magic's most evocative mechanics. And if you enjoyed exploring the flavor, history and gameplay of Delirium, let me know, and let me know what other mechanics you'd like to hear more about as well. We'll give it some time in the spotlight. Together we'll keep unearthing the secrets of Magic's multiverse, one mechanic at a time. Until next time, and keep embracing chaos. Bye.